Hello and welcome to my first ever attempt at a Let's Read video. I watch a fair few of these Let's Reads from like old video game magazines and things like that, which I really love, and there are a lot of people out there that do some really great stuff. Classic Gaming Quarterly in particular I really enjoy, and especially when he hooks up with Corey over at My Life in Gaming. I love listening to those guys basically talk about old video games. I don't think I could ever do as well as they do, especially because I don't have the camera set up. I am literally... I've got a cheap little tripod here being held down with a hammer and some controllers and a battery pack with my iPhone as my camera. And I don't really have any good lighting, so I'm just using natural lighting. So this is a bit of a trial run, and I hope it works out. But I thought that maybe, for me, the best thing to do would be to actually talk about magazines that I was actually a part of. I feel like that's something I can bring to the table. So we're going to start here with Pocket Games issue number 1, the number 1 unofficial Game Boy Color magazine, which I don't know who gave them that moniker. I think it was themselves. But anyway, this was a Ziff Davis magazine. Which is, of course, where I ended up working now and I really hope the lighting is okay, because this is actually a very glossy magazine, which is why another reason why I really can't use direct light on it. But, yeah, so just to get a bit of a background here. So before we get into the magazine, this was the very first sort of pro writing gig that I had as a games journalist, I guess, if you want to use that phrase. And it was all due to Mark McDonald, who I think a lot of people will probably know from 8.4, although he's moved on from there now. You might know him from the Tetris Effect series at this point. But Mark and I worked together on Electronic Gaming Monthly. He was an editor at the official PlayStation magazine at the time of this issue. And so Ziff Davis used to release sort of one-offs. I think they just called them specials. And this was one that was released in the summer-fall of 1999, which was just before I got my job at Ziff Davis at Expert Gamer. And it was kind of a trial run for me, I think. I can't remember if I was in the process of interviewing for the job at Expert Gamer when this was made. I want to say that this was actually kind of part of my job interview, was to work on this magazine. So basically, I was the editor-in-chief of GamingAge.com at the time, which I'd started with Sam Kennedy and Jim Cordera, Brady Fichter, Dave Toole, and I hope that's everybody. And with a lot of help from Peter Bartholow, who's another name that video gamers may recognize. And so Sam, I think at this point, had moved on to GameFan. I think he was a Game Fan. At least that was his first job, and I was sort of still angling for a job in the industry. If you know the history of Gaming Age, which I feel like I should maybe talk about someday, but a lot of industry personalities and future game editors came through Gaming Age. I know Che Chow, Mark McDonald wrote for us as well at one point, but a lot of times that was sort of the same thing, to get some work out there. Sort of the fledgling days of video game fan sites. And anyway, we all sort of knew each other from an IRC channel called Vid Games, which again I think deserves its own documentary, because the amount of video game industry personalities that used to hang out on the channel Vid Games is insane. But that's where I met most of these people. And when Mark got put in charge of this magazine, which again was a one-off, was a special. He reached out to me and asked me if I wanted to write a bunch of reviews, which I think, again, was part of a job application, because while I was writing and running big sections of GamingAge.com, that was long form. It was, it was the internet. Our reviews could be as long as we wanted them to be. We could write them however we wanted. Of course, working for a magazine, you're working to very strict word counts, very strict space regulations. And I think it was a chance for me to prove that I could do that sort of thing. So anyway, that's the preamble. Yeah, so we've got the first issue of Pocket Games here, which was, I think, a quarterly magazine. I think it was quarterly for a while, that came out from Ziff Davis. And fun fact, when I left Ziff Davis, the last few magazines I worked on was actually as a bit of a managing editor for later issues of Pocket Games. Honestly, I think what this is, well, there's two reasons this came out. I think the main reason is, of course, this was just after the Game Boy Color had come out, which, of course, you see, we've got the Game Boy Color here. I think that came out in late 1998. November of 1998 is when the Game Boy Color came out, so this magazine would have hit shelves 4 to 6 months after that. So you had that. Plus, something I learned after I got to Ziff Davis was anytime you get a chance to put Pokemon, and especially Pikachu, on a cover, you do it. So let's dive in here. Sorry, I have to keep turning on my screen here because it keeps turning off. So yeah, let's dive into the issue. So yeah, like I say, this is from the editors of Electronic Gaming Monthly. Kind of. I mean, it was actually from an editor of OPM, along with editors from Electronic Gaming Monthly. Let's open this up. You know, and of course, we start off with an ad for the Game Boy Color. This was a huge thing. The Game Boy had been around since 1989. We were into the 10th year now, and while the Game Boy Pocket, I think, was a big deal, and Pokemon had kind of kept the system running for quite a while, Nintendo releasing a color version of the Game Boy was huge, and it definitely revamped sort of the pocket gaming market in the United States. So this was a big deal. You know, the Game Boy Color coming out was a big deal. So we've got, again, I really hope that the glare isn't too bad on this. Going down some of the masthead here, you see we have the editor-in-chief, Mark McDonald, associate editor, Dan Shu, Crispin Boyer, Sean Smith, Chris Johnston, Che Chow, John Riccardi. All those guys are EGM people, or were EGM people at the time. Cameron Davis, I will talk about him later. He ran a website, I believe, called Game Boy HQ. I think it was the first Game Boy fan site on the internet. And we'll talk about him a little bit later. He's also a vid games guy, a good friend from Australia. Peter Bartholow, again, another good friend. Christian Nutt, I think OneUp.com people will remember this was probably one of his earliest contributions to a magazine. And then this was the very first time I ever got to see my name in a masthead on a magazine, which was the most amazing thing in the world. I just can't tell you how exciting this was at the time. This is what I wanted to do with my life, and the fact that I finally had my name in print was unbelievable. And Dean Hager was also, I believe at the time, the managing editor of Electronic Gaming Monthly. Johnny Masthead, Trickman Terry Minnick, who was the tricks editor at Ziff Davis way before I got there and way after I left. Actually, no, he didn't make the move to San Francisco. But anyway, Wataru Maruyama, I think he was the West Coast editor here. I think he was the editor-in-chief of Official PlayStation Magazine for a while. Jennifer Whitesides, copy editor. She was a copy editor there forever. Gary Steinman, managing editor at Official PlayStation Magazine at the time. And I believe he works at Bethesda now. I'm not going to go down the whole list here, but again, just sort of calling out, I was so excited to be in a masthead in print at the time. Yeah, unreal. This was also a good chance, and one of the reasons that these magazines existed was because that way, you know, was probably a cheaper way for companies like Infogrames who were really, really backing the Game Boy Color to get an ad in a magazine that probably didn't cost them as much to get an ad in this magazine as it did in EGM. And the thing about print ads you need to know too is the way that, you know, this here, probably the most expensive ad space in the magazine, if not maybe the back cover, but otherwise, yeah, probably the back cover most expensive. Second most expensive ad page in the magazine. And then sort of as you go through the magazine, the closer to the front your ad is, the more expensive it'll be. So it was a chance for them to sell some ads that were just for the Pocket Games crew. Wow, that is quite an Electronic Gaming Monthly cover. I love that we're sort of in the beginning of when you're seeing email addresses and things like that. You got all these quotes from people who sent in, who we know them more about from their emails than their actual names, which I think is funny. Midway, when the Game Boy Color came out, Midway went huge into the Game Boy Color market. They were really about getting their arcade games on the home console, and especially I think they saw a big opportunity with the Game Boy Color to get some of their old school arcade games onto the system. I mean, you got some real classic stuff here, like 720 Degrees, Joust, and Defender, and you see they doubled up some of these older games, Moon Patrol and Spy Hunter. I think every one of these games is actually reviewed in this issue. So we'll talk about them a little bit more. And of course, Mortal Kombat 4 was pretty new at the time, but as we're going to see when we see the review, it was a pretty awful port to the Game Boy Color. You have to remember, even though this thing was in color, it was still basically the Game Boy hardware that came out in 1989. So the hardware was 10 years old. And when it came out in 89, it wasn't cutting edge. It was basically an NES. So the system itself felt almost 10 years old when it was released. So now we're talking about hardware that feels 20 years old. But anyway, Midway was really, really, really heavy into the Game Boy Color. Keep jumping up every now and then to make sure I'm still in frame and still getting stuff on the screen. I love this aesthetic, by the way. This whole contents page being on the Game Boy Color screen. Actually, I don't even know if that's a color. That's actually just a Game Boy Pocket screen. Still a very cool idea, and I love the color palette that they used in this issue. Vatical Entertainment we've got here. Sorry, I need to lock my screen. Yeah, so Vatical Entertainment, I don't have a whole lot to say about them. I did look up a little bit. It was founded in 1999, so this is a very new company at the time by Jim Ireton, who was apparently in gaming since the late 80s. I think he ended up being vice president at Atlas at some point. But they were also, you could see like they're basically a new company, but a lot of what they were doing was licensing like stuff from Koei, like Top Gear, Pocket, Spy versus Spy. Sorry, not Koei, Kemco, Telegames, Yar's Revenge, another really classic early 80s game that's coming to the Game Boy Color. But one thing that I really sort of noticed when I was looking at this ad is that Vatical was really pushing two things. One, a rumble feature, which was not something we were crazy used to anyway. I think the DualShock controller was fairly new by 1999 on the PlayStation, and of course the N64 had a rumble pack you could plug into the back of the system. So rumble on a controller was a fairly new concept even in the late 90s, but never thought about it on a console or on a handheld console, especially where it wasn't built in. But yeah, the rumble was actually, and I'll maybe show up a picture of what one of these cartridges looked like, but the rumble feature was basically built into the top of the cartridges, and you would put, I think, a little AAA battery in there to power it, and it made the cartridges look funny, but it was pretty cool. It worked pretty well. The other thing they're really advertising here is talking, and really all that means is that they have voice samples in these games, and I actually checked out Zebco Fishing, and again, I'll run some footage of that.
Reel him in! That is not the Loch Ness Bass.
But I mean, yeah, you can hear speech samples on Game Boy games. I don't know if that was the first time that ever happened, but it was something that they were really advertising big time. You even see the rumble badging on these boxes. Here we are into the reviews. Now, the terrible thing about the reviews in this issue, which really I feel bad about, is there are no names on any of these. I wrote a ton of these reviews. I cannot tell you which ones I wrote because there's no names on them. I'm trying to remember. All I remember is after I had said yes to this project, Mark sending me a box full of Game Boy Color games that, if I remember correctly, I was reviewing while I was driving to E3 99, driving from Nova Scotia all the way down to, I want to say that was Atlanta in 99. Maybe it was 98. I don't remember. I think it was 99. Because I seem to remember on that trip, we stopped in New York City, me and my buddy Jim, who were driving down to pick up our friends Jim Cordera and his wife now, his girlfriend at the time, Heather. Jim Cordera was also one of the founding members of Gaming Age, and we were going down to cover E3 for Gaming Age. And I seem to remember that we stopped in New York City and stayed the night, and while I was sitting there, I was playing a bunch of these games for review. on my Game Boy Color sitting in his basement. I think Prince of Persia is one of mine. It reads like something I would have written, especially starting out with an exclamation. Now this is a true classic. That totally sounds like the way I was writing things in 1999. Prince of Persia blew through a lot of computer game boundaries when it was originally released on the PC in 1989, and now Game Boy Color owners can experience one of the best games of all time. This conversion is excellent. Everything is easy to see, and the controls, running, jumping, fighting, and more are spot on. Players have unlimited lives at their disposal in order to finish the game, but must do it within an hour. Puzzle solving, performing death-defying leaps of faith, and even sword fighting all have to be mastered in that hour in order to complete your quest and save the princess. Okay, it doesn't have the most original plot. Everyone should play this game. Not only is it an important piece of video game history, but it also offers up a fun, challenging gaming experience for people of all ages. So the reason I read that and the reason that I mentioned this earlier, I absolutely, this was a new thing for me. I had been writing reviews for a website, so you could write 1,000-word reviews, no problem, and it was easy to do that. I don't know if anyone who has ever had experience doing this, but trying to write a full review in, I don't know how many words this is, 150 maybe? A full review of a game in 150 words, that is an art form. It's really, really difficult to do. To make it a useful review, and I personally have always come from reviews from the standpoint of their product reviews. I want to tell you if I think that it's worth your money, if it's fun, and it looks nice, that sort of thing. The artistic side of it is less important to me, although it is important, obviously. But it was, crunching all this stuff down into really, really small word counts was a challenge. And I really think that my work on this magazine is what got me my job. But anyway, and I also love this layout, by the way. Let's just look at a couple of these. I'm not going to read them all. I will point out, of course, we got Super Mario Bros. Deluxe. This was sort of the linchpin release. This and Tetris DX for the release of the Game Boy Color. And of course, it was an amazing. I didn't write this review. They wouldn't have given this to a nobody freelancer that had never worked before. But it was just a Game Boy update of the original Super Mario Brothers. That's unfair. There's more to it than that. But either way, that was the game that got me into the Game Boy Color again. And actually, I should point out, when I got this job, I was not a Game Boy person anymore. I had bought a Game Boy in 1989, and I was really heavy into it. I think I had a library of like 30 some odd games. I ended up selling those for a Genesis, and I hadn't owned or played a Game Boy probably since 1991 when I got this job. I went out and bought the Game Boy Color, I think mostly for this job. So this was my reintroduction into the world of Game Boy. The other thing you're going to see in here a lot is a lot of sports games, because that was still a big thing in the late 90s where everybody, not just EA and 2K, I don't think who they even existed at that point, or not in that form, were all into sports games. This sort of caught my eye too. Blades of Steel is like one of my favorite hockey games of all time. It's an NES classic. I love it. I love it more than NES Ice Hockey. I remember being super excited to play Blades of Steel, figuring it would just be a conversion of the old NES game. But you can see here, of course, 4.0. Didn't quite make it. Real missed opportunity. I remember Konami, well, you can see here, they've got an NHLPA license on this game. And it seems like when they tried to revive Blades of Steel, they did it trying to get the NHL involved. And it just never, ever took off, which was a real shame because it was such a great, great, great series. But yeah, this is kind of crap. Big miss for Konami. These are questions that will haunt anyone who is unfortunate enough to buy the NHL Blades of Steel. Don't be one of those unfortunate souls. A big miss for Konami. I'm guessing Dean Hager wrote that review. But yeah, terrible game. Gex, boy. Crave was really pushing Gex. Legend of Zelda DX, that was another linchpin title for the Game Boy Color. Actually, of course, this was, wow, that got a 10. I'm guessing John Riccardi probably wrote this review. Legend of Zelda, with Link's Awakening was sort of an original Game Boy game that I missed. I ended up buying Legend of Zelda DX. Never played it. I never played through Link's Awakening until the Switch release came out last year or the year before. But, yeah, 10 out of that. I believe I wrote these three reviews as well. I remember Shadowgate, being very excited to play Shadowgate because, again, another one of my NES, one of my favorite NES games. Of course, it's from the old Mac Venture series. Obviously, by 6.5, it wasn't as good as I had hoped. I think there was a line in here that I wanted to take a look at, which I think is just kind of funny, speaking now as a 44-year-old man. Yeah, right here at the end. I still had a lot of fun playing through Shadowgate Classic once. It brought a tear to this old-timer's eye to relive some great memories of gaming days gone by. I'm saying old-timer. I think I was, when I wrote this review, I was 22 years old. Oh, little baby Greg. 720 degrees. I gave that a good score. I hate this game. I really hate this game. I think this is a good example of a reviewer trying to think more of his audience than himself, because I've never been good at 720. I've never liked 720, but I know I'm pretty positive I reviewed this game. I gave it a 7.0, which isn't a great score, but if I went just based on how much I liked this original game, it would have been much lower. But I know that there are people who like this game. I know it's a classic, so I kind of make sure to err on the side of giving it a decent score. And Rampage World Tour, again, pretty good game. Here we got another Vatical. You can see Vatical was definitely looking for a place to sell a bunch of ads. Zebco Fishing again with the talkies. It's funny, in the previous ad it said they were coming soon, and here's the ad for all these games with the talking in them. Another ad, Duke Nukem. Duke Nukem was huge in the late 90s. GT Interactive Software, 3D Realms. This was developed by, it's a side-scrolling platformer. That's okay. It's not amazing, but it was developed by Taurus Entertainment. Taurus Games, sorry, which is still active. I think they started with Stargate on the Game Boy in 1994. And they've released like over 100 games. I didn't know that until I looked this up. But yeah, they're still around. So, I mean, good for them. Like, they've been around for like 27 years at this point, at the time of this recording, assuming they're still alive. The last I checked, they are. But that's super impressive that they've been around as long as they have. And they're just sort of a studio for hire, released over 100 games. This is okay. Not amazing. It's all right. Looking over here at these reviews, let's take a quick look. What I had a note about something here. Oh yeah, well, Mortal Kombat 4. I mentioned that from the ad early on. Like I said, Midway was all the way in on Game Boy Color. Mortal Kombat 4 feels like something they probably did because they felt like they had to do. And boy, is it awful. Wow. It's like this review says, Capcom and Acclaim have proven that the Game Boy is more than capable of generating large characters that are animated smoothly and control well, yet Mortal Kombat 4 is nothing but a collection of badly animated, badly colored sprites against some very bland backgrounds. The only good thing about this whole package is that there's actually a little diversity in the music. Yeah, it's terrible. And I mean, even more upsetting is NFL Blitz. NFL Blitz was super popular in the offices of Ziff Davis. We had a Blitz machine. We had a few different Midway machines because Midway was, of course, based in Chicago as well. But yeah, boy, this version, it looks like a sort of a low rent super play action football, which is actually what the reviewer here calls it, a very basic play action football ripoff with severely limited playbook. It's too bad. We got Carrot Crazy and Pitfall Beyond the Jungle too. Well, Carrot Crazy is actually a decent side-scrolling platformer. Not bad. Pitfall, Pitfall seems to always have been hit and miss ever since the original, like, 2600 versions. Just moving forward in my notes here. Again, a bunch of throwaway reviews. Turok 2 Seeds of Evil, that's an interesting, again, a side-scrolling platformer trying to pick up on the popularity of a very, very, very popular 3D shooter series on the N64. Sorry, I just turned away from the camera there. 3D shooter series on the N64. It got a decent review. It's okay. Wario Land 2DX, total blind spot for me. I've never really played a Wario Land game, but this one was well reviewed, obviously. And, of course, Quest for Camelot, another sort of action RPG that, whatever. So here's the first ad we see from Metro 3D. Again, it looks like they're more than anything licensing stuff from Taito. I don't know if Puzzle Master is licensed from Taito, but of course Bubble Bobble is, and Chase HQ, Secret Police, Chase HQ, of course, a Taito arcade game. Metro 3D as a company, I don't think they're still around. They were fairly new at this point as well. It was founded as a company called Metropolis in 1998 by a couple of ex-Capcom employees. Joe Morici and George Nakayama. George was the president of Capcom USA before this. And Joe Morici was a senior VP, and his claim to fame is that he claims he was responsible for renaming Rockman as Mega Man in the US. But yeah, Metro 3D, fairly new company here. They had changed their name to Metro 3D after they signed a third-party dev agreement for the N64 and Game Boy Color. So this might have been one of the first ads we ever saw with the Metro 3D logo. It's a terrible logo, by the way. Anyway, moving on. I think I might have written this Bug's Life review as well. I'm almost positive I wrote this Klax review. I've always been a big fan of Klax, ever since playing it on the NES, the old unlicensed Tengen cartridge. Big fan of it. When I bought a Lynx, Klax was the first game I owned. I think I have Klax on the Genesis. One of the two versions of Klax on the Genesis. I don't know why. There's something about it. I'm not very good at it, but I really enjoyed it, and I think it comes through in the review here. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that I wrote this review. It's a good translation. Klax relies a lot on color and a lot on voice samples, and I don't remember. I'll run some footage of this. I don't remember if the voice samples are there in this version. But yeah, they are. It actually says in the review here, most impressive are the voice samples used in Klax. Both the announcer and the spectators sound absolutely awesome considering what we're used to hearing from this hardware. Unfortunately, the rest of the sound effects aren't all that great, and the music is non-existent. But still, it's a good game. Hey, look. This ad has a logo for Expert Gamer, which is who I'm about to go work for after this magazine. I wanted to point out this sniper gun for the PlayStation. I don't know who originally created this. This was released by Newbie, but it came out for a bunch of different systems, and I actually own the Saturn version of this gun, and it's red. When you shoot it, these little lights on the side light up. This was a great light gun. I loved this thing. Yeah, I think this was my go-to light gun for the entirety of the Saturn run, which was, yeah, I just sort of saw that sitting there. I was like, oh, wow, I love that thing. More reviews. This issue is all about reviews. I think I might have reviewed Tarzan here as well. I'm almost positive I wrote the Joust and Defender review, and I don't know if this is the first one we've looked at here, but again, this is a good example of sort of these classic Midway arcade games, or just classic arcade games in general, coming to the system. Like you see Frogger actually here from Majesco down below. This system was a great piece of hardware for these classic arcade games, because I mean they didn't need a ton of power from the visual side. I think the only thing that I had a problem with on this, especially with Defender, like Defender moves so fast, and if you remember, the Game Boy Color still wasn't backlit, so it was real easy to lose what was happening on the screen. But if you sort of could get past that, it was a great game. Monopoly, of course, because Monopoly has to come out every few years, especially on portable hardware. This one I found kind of disappointing. I went and actually tried to play some Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle 3. I loved the first Bugs Bunny Crazy Castle, and I think anybody who's followed that series online at all, or even a little bit, knows that Bugs Bunny, like, one of the funniest things about this series is that the licensing, I think it's a Snoopy game, I think it's is it a Woody Woodpecker game? It's had a bunch of different licenses attached to it, but that series. But this was the third one. It's okay, but it doesn't have sort of the simplicity of the first one, which is too bad. But the Crazy Castle game is quite good. Pokemon Pinball, I loved. I'm not a Pokemon guy. I will never be a Pokemon guy. It is also, I think it was the first Rumble cartridge I ever owned for the system. It's a really good game, though, and you can see by the 9.0, obviously the reviewer felt the same way. But yeah, big fan of Pokemon Pinball. This was a big deal. EGM ran these, and I think it was Sean Smith who wrote most of these peripheral reviews. But of course, we've gathered a bunch of the peripheral reviews that were Game Boy centric and put them in here. I dare say almost all these were probably part of EGM at some point. This thing is hilarious. The Handy Pack Color. So you know the I forget what it was called. I mean, since the Game Boy was released in 1989, you could buy lights and magnifiers for them. And I mean, the Game Gear was the same way in 91. That new Game Gear Micro actually had a micro version of the screen magnifier that you could clip onto it so you could see. But I remember my friends having, I think they were just called Light Boys. But this thing is insane. Interacts all-in-one exoskeleton, includes a magnifying lens with backlight, stereo speakers, and a knob joystick with button overlays. The Handy Pack's magnifying lens gives you a decent view of the action, but the backlight has a nasty glare. The big surprise here is that the joystick feels great and it actually makes a huge difference. Fortunately, the bulky size and weight will keep pocket enthusiasts at bay. That was always the funniest thing about these things is like, well, you've sort of taken the portability away from this when you attach all this stuff to it. I mean, like you've got, excuse me, you've got cables plugging in the bottom. It's just insane. And this review actually brings out something that was always a problem with any sort of lighting system that sat above the Game Boy and Game Boy Color screen, was that if the light wasn't right on the screen, it would create more of a glare than actually light the screen, which was a real problem. I wanted to go through a couple more of these. This, I remember seeing people around here that actually had one of these. This, if I had kids back then, I would absolutely have bought something like this for a Game Boy Color, because watching my kids drop their phones over and over again, this would be important. There's another one, the Super Zoom. And again, see, the built-in lights are quite weak and have a tendency to create a distracting glare. Here, the glare is less of an issue. Well, actually, no, it's more of an issue. The two lights are situated closer to the screen, but the glare is so bad it makes them useless. So, I mean, any of these sort of magnifiers that sat off the screen with a light on them always caused a bit of a problem. This is hilarious. This is the Game Boy Color protection pouch. The Light Madness feels a lot like the Light Boy. This is clearly the favorite of the crew that reviewed all this stuff, though. There's one in here that I did want to talk about, though. Oh, maybe not. Wait a minute. Maybe I missed it. I'm going to go back. Go back. Nope, it must be an ad I'm thinking about later. All right. No, I did have one of these. Hang on a sec. Oh, I think this is the one. So this Game Light Plus... it's part of it reminds me of an old peripheral for the original Game Boy, which was just, I think, called the Newbie Game Light. Yeah, it was a Newbie Game Light. And it was basically, you take this piece off that's magnifying, and it was just a sort of a clip that went over the top of the Game Boy, and I'll show a picture of it, a clip that went over the top of the Game Boy where the batteries lived in the top, and then it didn't magnify the screen, but it bordered the screen, and it had lights on two sides that would flood the left and right sides of the screen with light. And man, I had one of those. It served me very well on late night trips. In the summers when we used to go to the racetrack with my dad and my uncle, we used to be driving down the roads late at night, and that Game Boy with that Game Boy Light served me well. But yeah, this is sort of an evolution of that, I think. The Game Boy Light originally didn't have the magnifier, but yeah, that Game Light I loved. All right, so I have a bit of a... So here's sort of the meat of this issue, for me anyway. So we'll go through this real quick. So I had mentioned before that I was like a lapsed Game Boy player at this point. I had bought into Game Boy when I was, in 1989, when I was like 13 years old. Super excited about it for about 2 or 3 years, and then moved on to like the Genesis and TurboGrafx and Super Nintendo, and kind of didn't need a Game Boy that much anymore. For the amount of traveling and stuff we were doing, just didn't need it. So I sold it, and I didn't pay attention to Game Boy for the bulk of the 90s. I feel like the editors of this magazine probably realized that as well. This was a refresh of the Game Boy as a console and the Game Boy library. And of course, because it had been around for 10 years and because everything on the original Game Boy played on the Game Boy Color, it made sense to do something like this. This is basically a buyer's guide, because if you're like me, jumping back in and kind of thinking like, okay, well, is there anything that I've missed over the last 10 years that I should definitely be playing? So I think this is brilliant. And I reached out to John and Mark to ask them who put together this list, and they pointed me towards Cameron Davis. So I reached out to him, like I said, an old friend from Australia, and I'm just going to read some of the stuff that he said, because I have some issues with some of the order that this stuff is in. And I'm just going to quote him. When I asked him, he said the top 50 list was mostly me. A bunch of us were out for dinner at E3 '99, which he thinks I was probably at that dinner as well. And Mark McDonald asked Cameron if he'd like to join the team, and of course he immediately said yes. Cameron goes on to say that he just sold Game Boy Headquarters, which was the world's first Game Boy specific fan site, which was actually released pre-Pokemon, to GameSpot a few months prior, and he had written a Best Game Boy Games Ever article for it. And Mark suggested that he basically repurpose that article for this issue. And Pete Bartholow, who was also at that meeting, and again, an amazing guy, somebody who helped me get started in the industry as well. I count him up there with John and Mark as getting me into this industry, who was also involved, said that it made sense and introduced Cameron to the phrase of work smarter, not faster. And of course, I think Pete at that point was part of Intelligent Gamer. I don't know if that magazine still existed, but that was what he'd been working on before. Couple of other things I'm going to say before we actually get into the... Actually, you know what? No, I'm going to wait until we get to those games to talk about it. But yeah, when I showed him, I sent him pictures of this issue and showed him the order, and he goes like, wow, even I'm scratching my head over some of these placements. Anyway, and he also can't believe that he ranked Donkey Kong 94 so low. All right, let's move on. So yeah, this is a great idea, though. And of course, lists are like catnip to magazine readers. And of course, they're still like catnip to website readers today. Sorry, my voice is starting to go here. So of course, we've got Pokemon number 1. That makes perfect sense. Pokemon was a phenomenon. I'm not sure I agree with it, but because I've never been a Pokemon guy. But you know what? Sure, why not? I thought it was kind of funny in this list. From everything that I learned, you do your list in descending order. So you start at the bottom end and move up to the top is sort of the anticipation of getting to the top. But when you consider that this is a buyer's guide, it makes sense that this was first. So yeah, anyway, Pokemon, game I never played, never probably really will ever play. But you know what? Whatever, it's a buyer's guide. I mentioned before, Zelda DX, of course, very deserving of being here. Never really played it until it was remade for Switch, but glad I finally did because it was fantastic. Tetris and Tetris DX was probably the reason that I wanted to buy a Game Boy Color outside of getting this job. It actually was, Tetris was listed as number 1 on the previous top 100 games list that EGM had printed up to this point. I still prefer the original 1989 release, but this version was quite good. Actually, you can see right here, when the Electronic Gaming Monthly made its definitive list of the 100 greatest games of all time, this was the one that took out the top spot. But yeah, it was great. Moving on here. Metroid 2, this feels like a weird placement to me. I really, really, really don't like Metroid 2. I think it plays terribly. I think it doesn't look good. It's also a big blind spot for me. So is Wario Land. I've never really played either of these games. I think I need to get in and actually play them someday. Donkey Kong 94 is what most people call this at number 6. This is one of the ones that Cameron actually said if he had this list to do over, this would be one of the top 3 games. This game is so deceptive when you first play it, when you first see it. Like, I remember seeing this game around, but the way it was packaged and the way you saw, I didn't pay close attention to the coverage, But what little bit I knew of it, it was just Donkey Kong, which made sense. It wasn't weird for classic arcade games to come out on the Game Boy fairly straightforward. So I just assumed it was Donkey Kong. And when you play this, the first few levels are the levels in the arcade version of Donkey Kong. But then when you finish, I don't know if it's 3 or 4 of those levels, basically Donkey Kong and Mario escape from the original arcade ecosystem, and then it turns into this really cool platformer, totally original, for like just a massive game. It's very cool, and it's so surprising, so unexpected when it happens, especially if you go in completely blind. I highly recommend this. And like I said, Cameron was saying if he had it to do over, this would have been one of his top. It's still 6. This would have been top 3. And if you've never experienced it, I highly recommend it. It's just a very, very cool idea, and something that, like I said, it's not expected. So it's so much more than an arcade port. It's very neat. I mentioned this before, of course. Super Mario Bros. Deluxe was one of the 3 main games that Nintendo used to sell the Game Boy Color, along with Zelda DX and Tetris DX. You can see all of them have made the top 7 in this group. This was back when you didn't see Mario games 2 or 3 times a year, so it was exciting to get a remake of this. I don't think it had been remade up until this point. If it had, it was probably just the Super Nintendo. Yeah, it would have been. So Super Mario All-Stars would have been the only other time I remember seeing this remade on a Nintendo console. And this feels way more true to the original than the Mario All-Stars version on the Super Nintendo. If you've ever played that game has the physics feel weird in that game to me. So this feels way more true to the original. It's also, if you look at it, it kind of sets the stage for what Nintendo was about to do with their Mario Advance re-releases on the Game Boy Advance a few years later. Because it just has, they added like features like, I think I don't know if it was speed runs. I'll just read this here. So Super Mario Bros. Deluxe comes with enough great extras to make it a must-play for anyone who ever fell in love with the original, including an awesome 2-player link cable mode where Mario and Luigi race to the end of the levels, a time attack mode, all the lost levels, which is Super Mario Bros. 2, the Japanese version, and little bonuses like banners you can make using your Game Boy printer. Finally, true Mario action on the go. Now give us Mario 2 and 3, which of course they would do as Mario Advance later on. Love to see the Final Fantasy Legend series jumping in here too, and I believe they actually included Final Fantasy Adventure, which was of course the first Seiken Densetsu game, the second one of which came to the US on the Super Nintendo, Secret of Mana. I was a big fan of the Final Fantasy Legend series. I forget what series those are actually part of. They were not built as Final Fantasy games, but this was one I could relate to because, again, when Final Fantasy Legend was one of the first games I bought, one of the early games I bought for my original Game Boy back in the late 80s, early 90s. I actually still have the boxed version, one of the only boxed original Game Boy games I have when Sunsoft re-released it. But these games were great. These games were just great. So it's fun to see them up here. Number 9, Super Mario Land series. Again, a bit of a blind spot for me. I loved the first one. I was sort of out by the time the second and third ones came out, which is, of course, where Wario was introduced as well. Number 10, I don't agree with this at all. I think the Mega Man games on the Game Boy are kind of crap. Feels weird that they're so high up, but, whatever. Castlevania series. This was wildly up and down quality-wise. The first Castlevania Adventure I loved, but I think I loved it more because it was Castlevania on my Game Boy, and I just wanted to play anything Castlevania at the time. But it wasn't great. Castlevania Adventure 2 was fantastic. And then I think they were hot and cold after that. R-Type. I've never played R-Type. Even in the arcade, I've never really played R-Type. But you know what? Sure. This looks like a good version. Let's put R-Type in 12th place. The Contra series, again, I remember playing the first Contra game on the Game Boy and loving it a lot. But again, I can't remember if that was because it was a good game or because I just wanted to play anything Contra. Kirby's Dream Land. Of course, everybody loves Kirby. Mole Mania. I love this because, of course, my co-hosts on Player One podcast both talk about Mole Mania. I've never really played it, but every now and then you'll see Mole Mania come up in people's lists and just say, "Bring back Mole Mania." So, sure, why not? Again, these Midway arcade games and 16th Defender and Joust. I think even though this is just Defender and Joust, I think this is kind of the magazine saying, like, this system was built to play classic arcade games. Don't pass this stuff up. It's cheap. You're getting a couple games per cartridge. You should definitely take a look at that. Super RC Pro-Am. RC Pro-Am is one of the most fantastic racing games ever made for the NES. This one is pretty darn good as well. I love that we have a little Canadian flag here. Thank you, Cameron, for that screenshot, if that was you. I mean, there's a US and a Union Jack there, too. Whatever. We're talking about Canada. Tetris Attack. Huge contingent of Tetris Attack fans at Ziff Davis. I'm not surprised this is also on the list. I'm surprised it's not higher, to be honest. Donkey Kong Land, well, you know what, let's go here. Revenge of the Gator, this is another one that gets a lot of love, pinball game that gets a lot of love from people when they're talking about classic Game Boy games. I've never ever really played that one, but it's not surprising to see it on this list. Donkey Kong Land series, seems like people either love or hate the Donkey Kong Country and Land stuff at this point. The character designs have not aged well. The quality of the renders have not aged well. Donkey Kong Country and its sequels look terrible on modern televisions. They still looked fantastic on old CRTs. I think that gets lost a lot. I think they're decent platformers. They're not Mario-level platformers, but they're still good. So, take it or leave it. This was impressive for the time just because you were taking what it felt like the Super Nintendo was, you needed the power of this. And Nintendo sold Donkey Kong Country that way, where it's like you could only do this with the power of the Super Nintendo. So getting even something remotely decent looking on the old Game Boy was pretty impressive at the time. Apparently they're good games, but I don't really know. I love seeing Mario's Picross on here. I've fallen in love with the Picross series over the last 20 years. I never really played this at the time. I totally give credit to my Player One podcast co-host, Phil Theobald, for getting me into Picross. And of course, it's just become a bit of a cottage industry here in North America, where you get a lot of releases now. Back then, I think this was the first Picross game to ever come to North America. There was a Super Nintendo version of Mario's Picross as well that never came here, although you can get it now on Nintendo Online. I'm actually just about finished with it. It's got a ton of puzzles. But yeah, this is fantastic. I was so, looking back on it, this came here because of the puzzle craze. And I mean, the Game Boy, originally in '89, was sold as a puzzle machine. And so it made perfect sense for this to come here. Yeah, it's super addictive, and it was a great... I can see why people fell in love with it. I'm in love with it now, too. Worms. Worms is a great game. This is one of the ones that Cameron looked at and said, "Oh my god, I can't believe I put Worms on this list." He says, I think I probably confused non-PAL gamers. But I think by the time we hit 1999, people knew what Worms was, even in North America. There was a fairly decent amount of people who cared about those games. So, But yeah, he said he felt weird about putting it on the list at all. Wizardry, I don't know, it's so weird with Wizardry. Wizardry, I feel like, doesn't have a huge following in North America, but it had a huge following in Japan. It was very, very, very popular. I think people give it a lot of credit for sort of the RPG industry in Japan. It's not a Japanese game. I think it was originally an American game, but it was ported to a lot of computers and systems in Japan. I know that even like the guy who created Wonder Boy was a huge Wizardry fan, which is why the second Wonder Boy arcade game was actually more RPG-like, because he was crazy about Wizardry at the time, so he just wanted to make a game that took advantage of RPG settings. Game & Watch Gallery at number 24. This is pretty, you know, straightforward for Game Boy fans. I've never been a Game & Watch fan, but there are a lot of people who really are. Nintendo's been trading on this for a long, long time. 25, Ultima. This was a weird one to see. The Runes of Virtue series. I guess this is good. I don't know. I've never really played Ultima games. But I guess that's good. Ultima is a series that I've always kind of like been interested in, and then I'll try it and be like, nah, this is not for me. So, I don't know. But maybe the Game Boy games were a little bit more accessible. Pokemon Pinball, we already talked about, is amazing. Kirby's Pinball is also amazing. King of Fighters 96, this is another weird one to be on there, but I've played this a little bit, and it's really cute. It really reminds me of what SNK ended up doing with the Neo Geo Pocket Color a couple years later, where they were bringing out sort of cutified versions of their Neo Geo arcade fighting games. Because if you look at the Neo Geo library, it's got a ton of fighting games on it, and of course they wanted to trade on the properties as much as they could. And this absolutely feels sort of the same way. And this was, of course, published by Takara. Takara was the company that was releasing all of SNK's fighting games, even in the early 90s, and like the Genesis and Super Nintendo. So I'm guessing this came out around the same time. Micro Machines, again, this is another very happy gamer inclusion. Of course, Cameron being from Australia, makes a lot of sense for it to be here. I've never been a Micro Machines fan, but it's got a massive following, especially in the UK and Australia. I love that the original baseball is on here. It's such a basic throwaway version of baseball, but it so perfectly encapsulates the sort of Game Boy vibe. It was one of the first Game Boy games. It was in the first run of the Game Boy, and it was just, you know, it encapsulates what the Game Boy gave you. Here's a super simple game. You know, you're not here looking for like campaign mode. You're not here looking for a franchise mode. You just want to play baseball, and that's what you get with this. I love that it's on the list. And then, of course, we get to the last 50. There's a couple things I want to throw out here. Double Dragon. I adored Double Dragon on the Game Boy. It's basically a stripped-down version of the NES game that Trade West released. Of course, Acclaim had the license by the time it came out here. I remember getting this for Christmas one year. This was the one and only time I went snooping for gifts at my place, and I found this, and I absolutely opened it, played through it, sealed it back up, and put it away, and got it for Christmas. I love that version of Double Dragon. It's not true to the arcade. I personally feel like it's better than the arcade version. That's just me. Street Fighter 2. This is a super impressive version of Street Fighter 2 for the old black and white Game Boy. Sensible Soccer is another one that Cameron called out and said, like, I can't believe I put this on the list. North American gamers would be so confused over this, but there it is. Same with Puyo Puyo. I don't know. That was an import. These are both listed as imports, actually. Here's my biggest problem with this list. Gargoyle's Quest should be top 10. Gargoyle's Quest is an amazing, amazing game. And, yeah, it doesn't belong this low on the list, Cameron. I'm not happy about that. One of my favorites of all time. It's a spin-off of the Ghouls and Ghosts series, Dai Makamura series. It's also the best game in the series as far as I'm concerned. But, yeah, Gargoyle's Quest. Play it, love it, live it, breathe it. Not much else to call out here. Another SNK fighting game. And some later stuff, you know, Carrot Crazy, which you've seen advertised and reviewed in here, 720 Degrees, Prince of Persia. So, yeah, pretty decent list. Good starter. So we're going to run through a lot of this stuff. So, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, one of the things that you wanted to do back in the late 90s was any excuse to cover Pokemon. I remember, and we'll get to this eventually if this series takes off, I remember when I worked at Expert Gamer, us at one point putting Pikachu on the cover when all we had in the magazine about Pokemon at all was a trick buried in like our 30-page trick section. Didn't matter, we need to put Pikachu on the cover. Or maybe it was Pichu at that point. I don't remember. Anyway, Pokemon Red and Blue strategy guide. This probably came straight out of the pages of Expert Gamer. I will say the layout is beautiful. I love the layout. There's that light I'm talking about, the newbie light. See, right there. that I had the original Game Boy version of this, and I loved it. It was so useful. It served me very well on my trips around Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and PEI when I was a kid. That's right there, the newbie Game Light, but it was built for the original Game Boy. I wish I still had that. Here's a bunch of Pokemon. Take a good look. Here's a bunch more Pokemon. Take an even better look. Hey, look, more Pokemon. This is what sold magazines in 1999. More Pokemon. We're up to number 64. More Pokemon. We're up to number 80. Slow bro. We're up to number 96. Still going. This is a good way to fill pages too, right? Wow, we were really... Look at that. We're still going. No ads through all this. Whew! It's going to shorten this video up. There we go. The official US PlayStation magazine on sale anyway. The only magazine with a demo disc each issue. I cannot stress how important this was in the late 90s and early 2000s. When you didn't have systems that were already online, so you weren't getting demos that you could download. You got demo discs. And of course, the official Dreamcast magazine traded on this quite well too. But boy, the official PlayStation magazine, not that it wasn't a good magazine, that was a great magazine. The crew there did an amazing job. And actually, like I mentioned, Mark McDonald, who's the editor-in-chief of this magazine, was an editor there before he moved over to EGM when I moved over there as well. And they put together an amazing magazine, but wow, did that disc sell magazines. Pokemon Yellow strategy, we've already covered red and blue. Now we're into yellow. Again, we're going to zip through this real fast. And actually, you'll see here, this is a pre-release strategy based on the Japanese version of Pokemon Yellow. Watch for the full final strategy in Expert Gamer in the coming months. So this is something that was actually written for this issue, which wasn't totally normal. But yeah, getting a real quick look at Pokemon Yellow, which I don't know. I assume Pokemon Yellow is basically Pokemon Red and Blue, except you have Pikachu right from the start. Am I wrong about that? I don't know. But yeah, we're gonna tear through this too. I love that image. We're still going. Man, we've gone through a lot of pages here. N64 preview exclusive. Okay, I love this. This is a great example of Pokemon selling magazines. So this is a magazine called Pocket Games. Pocket Games, Pocket Gamer. I always get it wrong. It's about the Game Boy for the most part. I mean, you know, sure, Lynx. I don't think Lynx was around at this point. Or Game Gear. But here we are, because it's Pokemon, we're going to include an N64, some N64 previews. Although these were a big deal. Pokemon Snap, obviously, for the N64. I guess it came out this year. Release date, July 26th. Pokemon Stadium, release date, October. Did those both come out in 99 or 98? I don't remember. But, like, these were a huge deal, especially because I remember, I think with this one, it came with the Game Boy reader that you plugged into the back of your Nintendo 64 controller, so you could bring some of your... I don't think you could bring all the Pokemon. You could bring some of your Pokemon into this game. This game, I think it was just a stadium battle game. I don't think there was anything else to it. But the super exciting thing, obviously, with both these games is you got to see 3D N64 level renders of your favorite Pokemon. But I think it's hilarious that this is in a Pocket Games magazine because it's Pokemon, which, again, Pokemon sells. Run through a couple of these real quick. So, just checking my notes. Yeah, so these were some upcoming Game Boy Color games. It's so funny to look at some of these, because some of these don't look very good. Like Ghosts and Goblins just doesn't look good. I want to call this game out. And like I said, if this turns into more of a Let's Read series, I will be talking about this further. I ended up doing a strategy for Mario Golf Game Boy, the color version of Mario Golf. I adore this game. This game is so good. It's a golf role-playing game, and it's just so much fun to play. There's so much to it. I ended up doing a strategy for it. I remember getting assigned the strategy and thinking like, oh god, I don't want to deal with this, and just falling in love with the game. I still have a copy that I need to stream at some point. But yeah, this is so good. Excuse me. More classic arcade and computer games. Of course, we got the original Spy vs. Spy, Ghosts and Goblins, International Track and Field. That's Konami trying to re-release some old NES games again. I don't know how well that went. Another classic one, 1942, one of my favorites as well. I think this was actually pretty decent. This, I can't believe, came out on the Game Boy Color, Street Fighter Alpha. And like the preview even calls out, with all the horrible fighting games on the Game Boy system, it's hard to get excited about Street Fighter Alpha. Both 10 playable characters, fluid smooth animation, smooth scrolling, detailed graphics, and all the original music. Street Fighter Alpha for the Game Boy Color may prove to be the first good modern fighter on a portable system. Capcom promises all the moves, super combos, and even alpha counters will be intact. We'll see. Boy, the Oddworld adventure games for the Game Boy sucked. I'm just going to throw that out there. For as much as I loved the PlayStation games, the Game Boy games were terrible. Deer Hunter. I don't know if anyone remembers. Deer Hunter was hugely popular with a certain group. I remember... Well, Vatical released these. I forget who owned the property to this. I think GT Interactive in some roundabout way owned the property. And I remember talking to their PR people and them saying, like Deer Hunter's not something that you'll cover in your magazine too often, for sure. But it was a huge moneymaker. Was it WizardWorks, I think? Huge moneymaker, anyway, for them. Motocross Maniacs 2. I need to run some screens, or some footage of this. I adored Motocross Maniacs. It kind of always felt like a weird offshoot of Excitebike because it controls exactly the same, but it is absolutely not Excitebike. I played this a little bit, and I don't like it as much as the original Motocross Maniacs, but I did love that Konami was re-releasing something like this as well. It's just a really simple motocross game. So, you know, it wasn't as good as the original, but it was still quite good. There's Duke Nukem we've already covered. Babe and Friends, because Babe was a movie. Earthworm Jim was another series that just did not translate to the Game Boy very well at all. There's some more Pokemon for you. Rainbow Six, that was an interesting one to bring to the Game Boy. There's a lot of previews in here, but we've already talked about this. This is on an ad for R-Type. Actually, that was on our top 50 list, but it's still a preview. That's weird. Croc 2, that was another series that I think Fox Interactive was desperately trying to turn into something. This is the last vestiges. Croc 2 is a great example of this, sort of the last gasp of the cute animal mascot character that's at one point in the late 90s everyone thought they needed, especially with Sonic. Between Sonic and Mario, everyone decided they needed mascots, so you started getting Arrow and Rocket Knight and Croc and Gex, and it just sort of, and RoboCod, like it just kept, RoboCod, James Pond, sorry. It just kept going on, and Croc 2 was kind of one of the final gasps of that whole thing. Bunch of sports games, obviously THQ releasing Electronic Arts style sports games. Conker's Pocket Tales, I love seeing this, because if anyone remembers, Conker was supposed to be a cutesy animal mascot character from Rare that was sort of trading on the fact that they were doing a bunch of stuff for Nintendo. Conker on the N64 existed very early on. It looked very much like basically Mario 64 or what became Donkey Kong Country and those types of games, and it sat in development hell forever and ever and ever and ever, and then was finally completely reinvented as what we got as Conker's Bad Fur Day, which basically was still like a Mario 64 style game, but with a bunch of potty humor and stuff like that, which I personally loved. I thought that game was hilarious. But Conker's Pocket Tales is kind of felt like it was supposed to be the Game Boy Color companion game to what the original N64 game was supposed to be. And I love that it came out in the form that it did. So Conker is like this cutesy little character. But when he finally came out on the N64, he wasn't anything like what you saw here in Pocket Tales. And even mentions it here. Conker may not be making his 64-bit debut for a while, but this summer he's jumping into an adventure for Nintendo's Game Boy. Yeah, in Pocket Tales, your goal is to save your gal pal Barry from danger and get his stolen birthday presents back. It was an action RPG. But yeah, it's what Conker was supposed to be as opposed to what he ended up being. tricks and codes. So there's only a few pages of these. When we get an Expert Gamer, you're going to see a lot more. Again, pre-internet, pre-sort of game facts when, and I mean, we're into the internet age at this point, but when it was more pervasive, tricks was a huge, huge, huge part of any monthly magazine. And Terry Minnick had just a sort of a huge database that he would pull from. OPM had them, Expert Gamer clearly had them, EGM had them. They were a big part of the magazine. I mean, if you remember, I think what public, I forget who owned Tips and Tricks, but Tips and Tricks had its own. That was a huge magazine as well. But it would also, because it was so easy to sort of print how many you needed whenever you needed, it also was used as page filler. So there aren't a lot here, but in other issues you would have seen a ton. And I really, again, love this layout. I love the multicolored layout of this magazine. I always thought this magazine just looked so pretty. And I might be a bit biased because it was, like I said, the first time that I was in print. So we'll skip through these real quick. And I love this too. Of course, the Neo Geo Pocket Color was coming soon. Actually, it says now available in 1999. This was a great little system that unfortunately did not last nearly as long as it should have. Yeah, so there was absolutely zero coverage of the Neo Geo Pocket Color in this issue, you'll notice. But, of course, our final 2-page ad is of this upcoming SNK system. Again, such a shame that this thing didn't last. I mean, it's basically the exact same, not the same architecture, but the same type of tech as the Game Boy Color. I mean, it's a passive matrix LCD screen playing basically 8-bit level games in color that you needed to light. It didn't have a backlight. And yeah, then the final page. Capcom, like I said, the rear page for a magazine was always super expensive. Capcom did a lot of rear page ads for Ziff Davis games. And again, this is a Game Boy Color centric one. Did this ever come out? I don't remember if Resident Evil for Game Boy Color ever came out, but I think the rest of these did. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. This was my first attempt at doing a Let's Read, trying to go at it from the angle of someone who was actually working on these magazines. It feels weird because I wasn't super involved in the creation of this so much as I just wrote a bunch of the reviews. But I did want to use it as my starting point just because it was sort of the starting point of my published career. So let me know if you like this sort of stuff. And I have my whole library that I can keep going. And like I say, when I was more involved in the creation of these magazines, hopefully I'll have some fun stories to share. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know. And if that is the case, I will continue on with, I think would probably be the next one would be the first issue of Expert Gamer that I was ever a part of. In the meantime, please please subscribe. Please consider joining my Patreon for my regular Generation 16 episodes. Check out Twitch TV/Stewart 3 nights a week where I stream mostly retro games, Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays at 9:30 p.m. Eastern. And, of course, check out Player One Podcast. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.